I thought I'd just fill in since it's taken a minute. He gave me this quiz when we first met 8 years ago, and I'm glad I passed.
All right. Well, she stole my later line. I was going to tell that story, but anyway. So thank you, baby. I think we can actually get started. So y'all know we're at Rogers Campground, and this is the 10th annual PorcFest. I just was playing around and put that in there. So, all right, here's the traditional political spectrum, left, right, liberal, conservative, right wing, left wing that everybody's familiar with and everybody uses and so forth. Where do we get this? It actually comes from 1790s France. If I'm too loud, too quiet, whatever, tell me louder. Okay, this comes from 1790s France of all places, because in the French National Assembly, the assembly members who sat on the left wanted to change to a republic, and the folks who sat on the right wanted to maintain the status quo of keeping a monarchy. So from that experience, 200 and whatever years ago, we now talk about left and right in American politics constantly. Now, we think of a liberal or a left-wing person as being for free speech, separation of church and state, against marijuana laws and blue laws, and there may be some need for definition at times here. A blue law, if you're not familiar, is a local law requiring closing on Sundays. Whereas we think of conservatives as being for lower taxes and the war on drugs and against minimum wage laws and business regulations. Go back. Now, instead of just listing policy position after policy position for them to be for or against, we can state it in an abstract manner. So on economic issues, liberals tend to advocate government control, but on personal issues, individual choice. And conservatives are the opposite, advocating individual choice on economic issues and government control for personal issues. So this is, I assume, very familiar. Now, if there's two political positions, logically speaking, there are four political positions, right? Because there's two more positions that aren't noted here. So the libertarian position advocates individual choice in both arenas, economics and personal issues. And the authoritarian advocates government control in both areas. Now, I'm using the word authoritarian. Other people use statist, but I don't think that's a well-known word among the American public. And populist has been suggested, and I notice the advocates for self-government list big government position. So those are all interchangeable, is my point. Okay, now we go to the place where you will determine where you fit on this spectrum. By the way, let me back up one, please. There's four political positions, but the title of this talk is the 5-sector political position, so you may be wondering, well, where's the fifth one? And you'll have to hold that thought till I get there, but yes. Okay, so if you want to participate in this, I'm going to pass these out. My wife's going to pass these out. And wait a minute, there's one caveat, and that is you are not permitted to look on the back. So look where the list is. Did I give you? All right. Well, we got some. She's got. I think we've got plenty there.
What about pencils, babe?
That I don't have. I'm sorry, I did not bring you pencils. I do have 2 markers I'll give to the first person that requests it. Okay, and I am watching to see if you turn it over. Don't do that. Yes, but we're going to fold it at a different place later, so. Thank you. Okay. So we're going to do this as a group, please. It says, circle each position with which you agree, do not give contradictory answers, and do not circle maybe. So you're only supposed to circle what you endorse as a policy. Caleb. And please speak up, ask questions, make comments.
I just noted that this has two copies of two identical columns. It basically, you've managed to double the two columns on the left are the same as the ones, or similar to the ones on the right, except they're mirrored.
Okay. You're going to find out that's not the case entirely. So hold that thought, and you're observant, but overly observant for the purposes of this quiz, really. Okay, so we're all together and ready to start. Is that the case? Free speech and outlaw pornography are meant as opposites. So if you circle one, you don't circle the other, because that would be contradicting yourself. If you circle... No, we're going to circle everything we agree with. If you circle free speech and press, which I'm guessing a lot of people in this room will, when you see it again a second time, you must circle it a second time. That's not a mistake. It's intended, it's meaningful. Now, it's legitimate to not circle anything, because you're either saying, I don't know, I have no strong opinion, it's not clear to me what you're really asking. So the choice is you circle one or the other or neither when they're opposites, okay? Is everybody with me so far? I don't know if I've said that clear. Let's go to the second line, privatized Social Security. If you'd like to see the Social Security program converted to you own the account type program, you'd circle that. There is no opposite, by the way. Yes, sir.
What if you don't want Social Security or private pub? What if you don't want any Social Security program, organized or whatever? I just entirely disagree with the whole idea of having some kind of system that people have to use, private or public. I mean, can we just abolish it altogether? Is that the same thing as what we're asking?
Yes. That would be the same thing as doing away with the government mandated program that your employer has to match your deduction and so forth. So, but I've been doing this for 20 whatever years. You're the first person that's asked that specific question. So it's fun to hear a new question. Okay, there is no opposite for privatized Social Security. Y'all with me? Secret police, there is no opposite. If you endorse the idea of a secret police force, you circle it. If you're against it, you skip it. If you don't know or you're unsure, you skip it. Skipping it is meaningful. Pro-life and pro-choice clearly are opposites. And I'm trying to be neutral with my terminology here. So it says pro-life and pro-choice. It doesn't say pro-life and anti-life or anti-choice and pro-choice. I gave this to a woman's class years ago, and this was on the first line at that time. And as soon as I put this up on the screen, the instructor said, "What do you mean pro-life and pro-choice?" It's anti-choice and pro-choice, revealing very clearly what she thought, right? Well, I'm trying to get your assessment. I'm not trying to lead you or manipulate this thing. So that's as neutral as I know to get. And if anybody has any suggestions for how to reword anything, I'd be open to hearing about that, by the way. Are we okay through line 2? Am I going too fast or too slow? All right, line 3. By the way, your lines aren't numbered, but higher and lower taxes are clearly opposite. If you circle either one of them once, you must circle it a second time. It's legitimate to skip. I'm going to quit stating those instructions because I think everybody knows what's going on. Second Amendment. This was from my political science classes, so this is a great review I did at the end of the term. So PorcFesters, I guess, know the Second Amendment is the right to keep and bear arms, and gun control is the opposite. We're through line 4. Line 5, private charity versus, and I probably should put the word government welfare in here to be clear, but most of us, when we hear the word welfare, assume it's a government program. So those are opposites. Clearly, decriminalized drugs and war on drugs are opposites. Separation of school and state. Now, in a libertarian crowd, that's a common phrase in the world. I have to tell people, I didn't say separation of church and state, I said school and state, so that's not a mistake. There is no opposite. Death penalty and anti-death penalty, opposites. Yes, sir.
Replacement workers.
If you'll hold till we get there so I can do it as a group. All right, no draft and draft national service are obviously opposites, hopefully. National service, I realized when I was looking at this, we hadn't heard that term in years, thankfully, right? But for a while there, people were saying, well, we ought to either have a draft or make people go into the Peace Corps or something similar. And I just hadn't heard anything about that in the news or anybody advocating it. By the way, there I am implying, again, sort of an endorsement of a position. I didn't mean to do that, so I take it back. All right, no farm subsidies, and farm subsidies are clearly opposite. Subsidy is a government payment to encourage an activity. So farmers are encouraged to grow crops. Taxation is theft, does not have an opposite. Nationalism and federalism are opposites here. I was asked to clarify that. Yes. Nationalism is where all authority is at the national level. Federalism is where there's a jurisdictional separation of powers. So, for instance, the national government can declare war for the country, and the states determine the speed limit on the highways and run the schools. That's federalism. All right, we okay through 10? We go on, please, Philip. Market prices and price controls are opposites. So market prices are just determined by buyers and sellers. Price controls where the government sets a minimum or maximum price. Anti-military intervention and military intervention are obviously opposites. Anti-foreign aid and foreign aid are opposites. Open immigration, people coming into the country, it's by itself. Involuntary mental hospitalization, I couldn't get the whole word hospitalization in there, means should people be committed to a mental ward against their will. All right, hate crimes legislation, do you think there ought to be additional penalty, if somebody commits a crime because they don't like the person's group membership? So you mug somebody, that's a crime. Should there be an additional penalty if you mug them because you didn't like their ethnic group, for instance? Whatever group, yes. Okay. All right, term limits. Limiting how many times a politician can be elected to the same position. One-party system is listed by itself, as is tax-supported abortions. I'll stop just to be sure everybody's with me and nobody has any comment or question so far at this point. Okay. Anti-United Nations and United Nations clearly are opposites. The Freedom of Information Act is a law that says you have the right to see what the government has in your files, what records they're keeping on you. Blue laws there, that is, again, local laws requiring closings on Sundays. Anti-national health insurance and national health insurance are opposites. That would help, Philip, if you'd point to the line. Thanks. Again, I was in my terminology trying to be neutral, so I called it national health insurance. If I wanted to sort of use a word that I would think people wouldn't like, I'd call it socialized medicine. If I wanted to term it so that you would think it was nice, I would call it universal health care, right? So again, one of the things I always ask is if anybody has a suggested changing of the wording, I would like to hear it. Anti-quotas and quotas are clearly opposites, and you might. Excuse me. Yeah, I was about to say, I'll let the audience define this. Are we talking about quotas like if 12% of the population is black, that means 12% of the congressmen have to be black? Or are you thinking of quotas in a different manner, just whatever severity or comprehensiveness you're thinking of? Okay, Fourth Amendment, anti-Fourth Amendment, get good review in a political science class. Fourth Amendment is the Searches and Seizures Amendment. It's the one that's been in the news with all the data mining. Okay, separation of church and state, that's the phrase we're more accustomed to. closed e-migration. You don't hear the word e-migration much, but that's leaving the country. Restrict homosexuality, and again, I let you define it. Are we talking about not letting them get legally married? Are we talking about outlawing the practice altogether? Whatever level you want to understand that to be. Reduce military spending and approval of the Vietnam War. When I wrote this, those are meant to be opposites. I don't know if that's the best choice, but remember this is from 20-something years ago, and the Vietnam War was fresher when I did this. Internal passports, so should you show papers to go about the country from state to state, for instance. Legalize and outlaw gambling are opposites. Outlaw replacement workers. Okay, should it be illegal for somebody to take a job when a union has gone on strike? That's a replacement worker, so should we outlaw somebody replacing a striking worker? There's a question here.
Yes, could we instead say decriminalize gambling?
Yes, I'll take that under consideration. Think about it, but thank you. Because you're saying it's not being endorsed, it's just relaxing the efforts to stop it.
In the absence of any government, which is the natural state of things, everything is permissible, So the fact that to legalize something means that they're allowing you to do it. But the true state of what we have now is that it was criminalized, was the original act, is that somebody, a group of people came along and said, nobody can do this. And then if you're going to really, allow gambling, what you're doing is taking away that restriction, so you're undoing what was already done. So decriminalizing and legalizing aren't quite the same thing. I know, I'm a stickler for words, it's semantic.
Thank you.
I'd actually have to slightly disagree with that. Like, for example, you could decriminalize something, and that would mean you would reduce the offense to being like a fine or a parking ticket or something like that, but without so you would sort of not throw people into jail for it, but then still keep it technically slightly illegal. Whereas legalize means remove the law against it entirely.
Okay, thank you all. I just couldn't imagine we'd get any disagreement among libertarians, but now I will say that since I used the phrase decriminalize drugs, maybe I should have used the phrase decriminalize gambling, so thank you. Okay, equal rights for women versus anti-equal rights for women. Again, you are defining this to some degree. What are we talking about? Making them subject to the draft or to be a SEAL or whatever level of what you think of equality would be. Anti-political prisoners and political prisoners are clearly opposites. And finally, the last of the 60 policy positions that you either circle because you agree or you don't circle because you disagree or don't know or are just not interested, whatever, is right to work laws. Right to work laws, if you're not familiar, are laws that make it illegal to make it a condition of employment that you be a member of a union. Okay, hopefully I said that clearly enough. All right, have we got that done? Everybody's gotten all? Okay, the next step is, no. Next step is to take your sheet and fold it from the back under the 4 columns. Now you can do it, yes please. So that it looks like this, so that you have a place to write the numbers based on how many things you circled in each of the 4 columns. So your page will look like this on the screen. And mine don't line up perfectly, but you can handle it, I'm sure. So the instructions are, number 1, enter the number of items circled in each column in the boxes below. So count how many you circled in the first column and put that number in the box. Likewise, second, third, and fourth columns. Uh-oh. Does anybody need any help? Okay, the second instruction after you've got those four listed is add the first column, subtract the second. Philip, next slide, please. So for instance, if you circled 10 in the very first column and 8 in the second, you say 10 minus 8 is 2 in the second box. And likewise, if you did, for instance, 14 in the third, 16 in the fourth, 14 minus 16 is negative 2. So your score is 2, negative 2. That's what we're going to plot. Negative 6. Negative numbers are included here. So, Philip, if you go to the next slide. Okay. Unfortunately, I can't point this. We start at 0. By the way, there's the answer that somebody already gave us. Where's the fifth position come from? It's the default position. Because you realize if somebody said, you know, I'm just not politically minded, I'm not for or against any of this stuff, I didn't circle anything, they would be 0, 0. They'd be right in the center. Okay? And let me go ahead and say two things about somebody who's in the middle or the middle of the road or centrist or whatever. You can either spin that positive or negative, right? Everything can always be spun positive or negative. So what's the positive version of I scored 0 on this quiz? We can win them all. No, I'm saying trying to be nice about their position, and that is they're not extremist like the rest of you people out there. And the negative version of it, of course, is, don't you believe in anything? I mean, you don't take a position on any of these 60 policies? Anyway, if you scored, as my example, a negative 2, you go up. Excuse me, I'm saying the wrong thing. If you scored a positive 2, you go up 2 and out 2. So you see where we end. It's kind of messy. I'm sorry, and I can't point to it from here. Wherever you find your position, I would suggest you make a circle about the size of a nickel or maybe even a quarter, because it's not a perfect quiz. I may have not said something clearly. You may have some ideas in your head that don't fit. But anyway, if on the other hand somebody scored this negative 4 and negative 12, you go down 4 and out 12, and there's where you circle the nickel or quarter size to designate your position, right? Did everybody do okay in the plotting? First one's up and down, yes. Second one's left and right. Up is positive, down is negative, right is positive, left is negative. And I don't mean that in any sort of judgmental sense. Does everybody feel like they found their position and were able to follow the instructions? Caleb?
I believe, honestly, that although I followed these correctly, I've wound up somewhere I did not expect I would show up. I expected myself, admittedly, to be somewhere lower down on the plot and further over to the right.
Well, I just want to say welcome to the family. He did manage to score Libertarian. Okay, I've forgotten what my next slide is. Okay. Now, you may have figured this out, or here's the answer to what you asked earlier, Caleb. The first column is the Libertarian column. It's 25 positions that a Libertarian would probably take. The second is authoritarian, 25 positions that a statist authoritarian would take, and conservative and liberal. Of course, I didn't label those because I'm trying not to bias people's responses, but that's how this is. Now, we have 10 policies in common between authoritarian and liberal. So that's why some of them are repeated. Okay, and of course, authoritarians and liberals agree on economic issues, right? For the most part. All right. And authoritarians and conservatives agree on personal issues. Government ought to stomp down on people's personal behavior. Philip, there's 10 policies in common between libertarian and liberal on personal issues. Philip? There's 10 policies in common between libertarian and conservative on economic issues. And there's 5 unique positions in each column. These are what I call acid test policy positions. Taxation is theft is very definitely the libertarian acid test. Closed immigration is what we think of for an authoritarian. So anyway, it's 60 different policy positions. If you'll go back again and again and again and again and again. So we have a common border between libertarian and conservative, those 10, common border between liberal and libertarian, the 10 personal issues. Libertarians and authoritarians hold no views in common. Liberals and conservatives hold no views in common. Given that case, you wouldn't want to have them having a common border, so the centrist position is necessary.
I'm noticing here on my paper, when I flip it over, the calculation is on the top, and on others, it's at the bottom. If anyone has the same paper, then your charts really turn like this.
Sorry about that. Apparently some of the printing didn't get done right, so watch for that. Okay, would you go back to where we were, please? One more. One more. One more. Are you going? No, go back. Back to the future. Okay, my inspiration for this when I was teaching political science is in 1988, the Democratic Convention was held in Atlanta, and the late Marshall Fritz, the founder of the Advocates for Self-Government, was all over the streets of Atlanta passing out these cards. And so I was going to use this in my political science class, and I realized two things. First of all, this was in the early 90s, and when I scored the President of the United States, George Bush at the time, he became an authoritarian. And I thought, that's not really going to go over well with the political science class. That's a little too much. So let me see if I can design a different one. I mean, maybe George Bush still shows up as an authoritarian, but I never tested it. But the other thing is I had a captive audience in my classroom, so I didn't have to give them something as they're walking down the street and hoping they bother to fill it out. I could make them do it for 20 minutes or however long. So it was an opportunity to make a more extensive survey that hopefully is more accurate given that there's more questions. Okay, Philip. Now, the only time I've ever known that somebody has used this in a poll, and this was the advocates version, the 10 question, was by Rasmussen back in 2000. And you can see 13% scored liberal, 7 conservative, 14 authoritarian, 32% centrist, not surprising. And by the way, the nice thing about the diamond chart is it preserves the left-right spectrum. It's still there, it's just we're adding more, right? So I'm sure most of you probably heard Tom Woods talk about the 3x5 card of accepted opinion. So we're going beyond the accepted opinion stuff. But look at the number for the libertarian when they did this, 16%. Now my understanding is if you go out to the populace and say, how many of y'all think of yourselves as a libertarian? The answer is about 2, maybe 3% now. And so what does this tell us? There's a lot of opportunity for outreach. There's people out there that agree with us, they just don't know it. So if you think about how many people potentially would want to move to New Hampshire and free the state, it's what, 8 times as many as maybe we would think of, they self-identify as libertarian. Okay. Now, when I gave this to an English professor's class one time afterwards, he came to me and he said, there's really a shorter way to do this whole thing. You can just use the First and Second Amendment. First Amendment is separation of church and state and free speech. Second Amendment's right to keep and bear arms. Philip? And of course, a liberal would agree with the first and disagree with the second, and a conservative would disagree with the first and agree with the second. A libertarian would champion both, and the authoritarian, of course, wouldn't like either. Now, Philip, the great thing about this is look at who we are as libertarians. We're agreeing with the Bill of Rights. We're the true Americans. We're the ones who have the right to the American heritage. And if you've ever had anybody say, you guys are against everything. You're against Obamacare. You're against the war in Syria. You're just so negative. Well, no, we're not. If you give them this version of the quiz, boy, talk about something you can do real quick. You can put the libertarian in a positive light there as being the person who's actually in favor of things, and these are even things that are part of the American heritage, so they're good. Let me check the time.
Hey, Jim. Also, as libertarians, we can form coalitions with those people that agree with us, like the liberals on the First Amendment and the conservatives on the Second Amendment. It's very easy for us to form coalitions on both sides.
And absolutely, and we should, of course, yes. Okay, I think there's another slide. Okay, if you want to see this again or show it to your friend or something, it's on my homepage at the college. The instructions tell them to print the sheets out first, and then I've got a audio Camtasia, if you know what that is, presentation where the instructions they can hear and see. But anyway, if you just search my name in Georgia Perimeter College or 5-sector political quiz. All right, y'all keep stealing my lines here. If you'll now, let's go to the next slide. We've got time, and Cherie and I have to go back to Atlanta on Saturday, so I'm regretfully going to miss the Remembering Rothbard panel, so I'm encouraging you all to go. I'm a big fan of Rothbard's, and I wanted to show a couple of things and give a couple of remembrances myself. Okay, this is Dr. Rothbard signing my brother's book in Washington in 1976. My brother introduced me to the books that Rothbard had written back in the early 70s. Next. And here I am meeting him in 1975 in New York. So all of us from Georgia were all excited to be in New York at the LP convention. Where's Murray Rothbard? We know he's in the room somewhere. And he's was such a pleasant guy. He would, obviously be happy to pose for a picture. And there I'm seeing him again at Wake Forest. Cato had their summer seminars. This was the first one. And I asked Rothbard a question. I said, you've written some stuff critical of Milton Friedman and John Galbraith. What have they responded? And he said, well, you got to understand, there's a great sociological law that says you never recognize anybody less famous than yourself. So they didn't respond at all, is what he is telling me. And, this has application throughout life. This sociological law, incumbent candidates don't want to debate challengers. The old money don't appreciate it when somebody goes out and earns a bunch of money and tries to integrate into their society. So, and the last time I got to see Dr. Rothbard was in 1994 in Atlanta at a Mises conference. I believe this was in October, and he died in January of the next year. So, much too early, but anyway, next slide. Walter Block, I think, told the story years ago. He said if you take all of Rothbard's published writings and put them on a shelf, it'd be more than 3 feet wide, which is rather impressive. I think everybody would agree, and I'm sure it's probably 4 feet by now. And so I went to the Mises store and checked what all are they selling from Rothbard. So here's the first slide, and the second slide, and the third slide. So there's not a lot of people that have had the output that Dr. Rothbard had. So I encourage you again to please go to the Remembering Rothbard. I would certainly be there if I could. Okay, now if you're unfamiliar possibly with Dr. Rothbard, my suggestion is start with For a New Liberty, or if that's too long, maybe What Has Government Done to Our Money, which in my memory is not really that long, 128 pages. I think there's some forwards and afterwards and all sorts of stuff maybe added in there. But anyway, Philip's jumping ahead of me. Okay, I have some books to sell. The first is The Minimum Wage, Maximum Damage from the Advocates for Self-Government. This has been in print since 2004. My wife's going to handle the book sales, if any. My inspiration for this was ISIL or The Pragmatist or somebody had a booklet, 12 practical reasons to legalize drugs. And I thought, there ought to be something like that about the minimum wage, a simple, to the point, cover all the bases. And so that's what this is. Also, go ahead. The Mises Institute published the 3rd edition of my Concise Guide to Economics, and Lou Rockwell was kind enough to write a laudatory introduction. I don't have those with me. And finally, what just came out relatively is my new book, The Haiku Economist, 101 Poems, Economic Principles, Economically Expressed, with an introduction by Art Carden. Maybe you know that name. Peter Schiff has a comic book about economics, right? Trying to reach people that don't want to sit down and read a 400-page thick book. And then there's the rap video, the Hayek Keynes rap video you may have seen. Again, we're trying to reach people who wouldn't traditionally be reached with economic theory. And so that's what this is. Haiku, if you'll go to the next. If you're not familiar, and I wasn't before I started doing these, I was just playing around with some friends and somebody saw it and decided they wanted to make a book of it. Haiku is Japanese poetry. It's 5, 7, and 5 syllables, 3 lines. And so the challenge, the reason I bothered to do this is, can I say anything meaningful in that few of syllables? And so I managed to write 101 and get them published. So I'm going to give you a sample of 5. Profits, the reward for moving goods to higher, more valued uses. The real class struggle, taxpayers and tax eaters, Marx mistook it all. More than Mother T, Borlaug's Green Revolution ended suffering. Your choice, said Ayn Rand, sucker or a bloodsucker in our mixed system. And finally, 70 should have put an end to the age of Keynes. Instead, he's back. Is that everything? Okay. By the way, The Advocate sells the Haiku book for $12. PorcFest, it's discounted to $7. And the minimum wage booklet is $5. So if anybody has any questions or comments, I think we still have a few minutes, and so we'll be happy to take them. Okay? Thank you. Here's a question, sir.
It's more of an observation. Obviously, in taking this test, some people might be disappointed that they went in a certain area on the chart because, as you said, but didn't really emphasize, non-answers matter, non-opinions matter as well. And I think we're all raised to have opinions, even though they're not sufficiently important. But that's important to note on this test.
Okay, thank you. There was one other thing I wanted to. What the heck was it? Maybe what was I going to do? Well, I'm still soliciting comments and questions then. Here we go, back here.
I'd like to just give a compliment. I'd like to just give a compliment, articulate, well-spoken. Thank you. Your students are very lucky at your college. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. My students are all online, so they never hear a word from me.
Well, I enjoyed this, and I hadn't heard about the First and Second Amendment test. I think that's great, and maybe we should be having, instead of just a free state project, a free country project for everybody who supports the Constitution, and everybody else can go somewhere else.
Okay. I think they tried that in Atlas Shrugged. Did anybody, when I suggested that this was the presentation I wanted to do, I was told, well, everybody's at PorcFest is libertarian, so it's not that meaningful. I'm soliciting. I'm not looking for compliments. I'm trying to get honest feedback. Did anybody have any surprises, or did you I assume everybody in the room didn't score a perfect 25 up in the top corner of a libertarian. So there are differences of opinions. Oh, well, okay. Well, here one did.
I personally think issues like taxation and welfare deserve to have a bit more representation than just 2 circles, because they are like very, very serious and critical issues, and yet over here they change your mark by like one square.
Okay. Well, I think there's 3. There's lower and higher taxes. There's taxation is theft, and then you said welfare. Okay. So what is that? 3, not 2. But you realize there's only. I'm not trying to be defensive. I'm sorry, but. To add in more of those means to knock out something else. And so, I'll take that under consideration and maybe try and look at that. And again, if anybody wants to email me or whatever with any suggestions, that'd be great. But that's part of my justification anyway.
I think you're right. There aren't a whole lot of surprises in this room as to what we came up with, but I think this is a good tool for talking to some folks that may think more like us but don't realize that they do. So I know a couple friends who I'm going to pass this out and say, okay, you really think that you're a conservative and you're You think I'm nuts for being a libertarian? Let's try this. See where you actually stand on some of these, and see where you might show up as.
Jim.
Okay, thank you.
Jim.
I would like to tell everybody something I do. If you have an Android phone, I think there's also for iPhone a similar app from, it's the Nolan chart is what we've done here. It may be the Advocates for Self-Government, but they have that as an app. So you're waiting for an airplane and you see somebody reading the paper, you strike up a conversation, you can hand them your phone and it goes through the 10-question version of this. And then, it's a seed to start a conversation. I've used that several times. Occupy Nashville was having their thing, and I'm a conversational guy. I go down and talking to somebody, and I say, well, here, go through this. And
Hey, Jim.
Then they see where they really are.
Jim, I had a quick one for you. You and I have discussed in the past that libertarians in good faith can disagree on abortion because abortion can be seen as an initiation of force. So how did you score abortion when it came to this test?
Well, like the Libertarian Party years ago, I avoided listing it in the Libertarian column. So I just made it a conservative and a liberal issue only. So I ducked the issue, I guess, is the short version.
How many points do I have to circle how many points do I have to subtract if I circle the copyright 1991 Jim Cox? And my serious question is, why the fuck are you copying something if you're copywriting something if you're a libertarian?
Why would I copy it?
Copyright.
Oh, why would I copyright? Yeah. There's two things I have not, I've been a libertarian since 1973, self-consciously. There's two things I have not jumped on the bandwagon of lately. That is the anti-IP thing. You can hate me for it. Go ahead. And Bitcoin, and mainly Bitcoin because I don't understand anything about it. Now, he asked me, why did I copyright this? First of all, I can plead ignorance. This was 1991 when I wrote and put that on there. I've been freely copying ever since, and I've encouraged other people to do it. So I never have, made any effort to enforce the copyright. I just want credit for it. But so far, Stephen Kinsella has not won me over. Okay. All right, I think we're out of time, but my wife wants to say something.
I just want to know, can they get blank copies of this if they're interested here or online or somewhere?
Yeah, I got about 5, and you're free to copy them. I don't enforce the copyright that I've listed there, so.
Excitement builds on election day, results come pouring in. A landslide victory for the underdog, a proud and glorious win. And the people cheer between their tears and call their rising sun to spread his might and shed his light on darkness overcome.